13 Sikhs were killed in rioting in 3 towns near Delhi. In one incident, a mob stopped 2 express trains and dragged off 2 Sikhs, killing one and badly injuring another. Reporting from Delhi, Michael Blakey.
This morning, Delhi was under curfew and orders had been given to the military to shoot arsonists on sight. They'd had a busy night. After a day in which more than 100 people had been killed throughout the country, the streets were littered with burned-out cars and taxis, most of them owned by Sikhs who operate most of the transport in the city. They'd taken the full fury of the violent backlash after the assassination of Mrs. Gandhi. This morning, after a night of terror, every Sikh taxi driver was off the streets. A new luxury coach was destroyed close to a government building. One of the most horrific deaths on a night which saw some of the worst violence since partition happened in the garden of an opposition MP, Mr. Ram Vilas Paswan. A Sikh taxi driver, chased by the mob, sought refuge in the home of Mr. Paswan. He ran for what he thought was safety, but he was caught. He was then doused with petrol. Someone lit a match, and the taxi driver burnt to death.
The worst thing that can happen in the country is now happening. There is no law and order in this country. If this can happen in leading opposition MP's house, what happens to the common man in the street?
This happened to, he was burned alive in that car.
He was burned alive in the garage along with the car.
Why?
Just because he was, he belongs to the minority community, Sardar. Because one Sardar did it, it doesn't mean that every Sardar is responsible. If one Hindu does it, it doesn't mean that every Hindu is responsible. This is what happened to the secularism of this country during the last 37 years. Such a tragedy.
All this happened at just 300 yards from the main Parliament building, and then the home of the MP was put to the torch. I was told that 6 calls were made to the police. They never turned up. So this morning the army was in control. They were heavily in force around Connaught Circus, the main shopping centre in the centre of New Delhi. Overnight, the mobs had set fire to hotels, banks, offices, even a cinema, all owned by members of the Sikh community. Today, the shops were closed. The city, recovering from a night of terror and revenge, was strangely quiet. The only people doing business were the flower sellers. They were making wreaths for the mourners who will tomorrow attend the cremation of the woman who for almost 20 years led the biggest democracy in the world and died at the hands of 2 assassins. Tomorrow in a field, not far from the centre of the city, hundreds of thousands of Indians and politicians and leaders from all around the world will pay their last respects to a remarkable woman who led her country out of poverty. The site being prepared today is close to the spot where both her father and her son Sanjay were also cremated. After being carried through the streets of Delhi, she too will be cremated. The fear is that when the ceremony is over, it could signal another outbreak of murder, looting, arson and violence.
Delhi is tonight again under curfew. The army is on the streets there and in 13 other towns and cities across the country as the violence between Hindu and Sikh continues. The latest estimate puts the number of dead in the 2 days since Mrs. Gandhi's assassination by Sikh extremists at about 350. Some reports put it higher at more than 500. In Delhi, world leaders have started to arrive for Mrs. Gandhi's state funeral tomorrow. Mrs. Thatcher left Britain this morning. She and the others are being welcomed in Delhi by a huge security operation as the Indian authorities try to prevent further violence during the funeral. The new Indian Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi's son Ranjiv, has again appealed for calm. This madness must stop, he said. My mother asked us to shed, not blood, but hatred. Yet the reports of violence continue. In Delhi, as elsewhere, Sikhs have been set upon, beaten and in some cases burnt to death. Some of the worst violence has been in the state of Haryana, just north of the capital. To the east, in Bihar state, it's reported about 80 people have been killed. To the north, in Jammu, Sikhs were surrounded in a temple, grenades were thrown and an unknown number were killed. In the big cities, like Calcutta, the Sikh populations are reported to be in hiding. Reporting on the day's events, Brian Hanrahan from New Delhi.
The arrival of the army in Delhi checked the widespread violence, but didn't stop it completely. They had orders to shoot on sight, and their presence was a considerable deterrent. They deployed in some force in the city centre, but the attacks on Sikhs continued elsewhere. The army will need more men to bring complete order. The roads, cleared now of traffic and people, have plenty of debris, some of it still smouldering. What is remarkable is that the violence was so widespread, with Hindus turning on Sikhs almost everywhere, discharging a resentment which has been building up for months. A feeling of anger still pervades parts of the capital. There's a curfew. Although it's not strictly enforced, it's closed shops and offices and emptied the roads of their usual throngs. There's still nothing like an official count of deaths and damage, but rumours abound, and one sent us to a small town 30 minutes' drive from Delhi. Saibabad is slightly industrialized and looks peaceful enough, with Hindus and Sikhs living close together. But this morning, 3 Sikh factories were surrounded by a mob and their contents ransacked and burnt. The few dozen Sikhs who've lived here peacefully for 16 years have lost almost everything they own. The attack went on for several hours, and it seems nobody tried to stop it.
They put fire to our factories and tried to damage our lives. We hardly rescued our life.
But theirs is a tiny tragedy. We found it by accident while asking about something else. Incidents like this are so commonplace they go unreported.
More than 50 leaders from all over the world will be in Delhi tomorrow for Mrs. Gandhi's funeral. The Indian authorities are mounting an unprecedented security operation to protect them and to try to prevent any of the unrest spilling onto the streets of Delhi whilst the funeral is in progress. The Indian authorities believe as many as 10 million people will line the funeral route. 10,000 members of the Indian Army have been called into Delhi. They'll be augmented by thousands more members of the Navy, Air Force and the police. Teen Murty House, where Mrs. Gandhi's body has been lying in state since the assassination, will be the starting point for the funeral procession. From there, the route will wind 4 miles through the city. The cortege, led by a gun carriage bearing Mrs. Gandhi's body and followed by a motorcade of VIPs, is expected to take 4.5 hours to complete the journey to the field at Raj Ghat, where the cremation will take place. Princess Anne, representing the Queen, and the British politicians are expected to stay at the British High Commissioner's residence or at the Presidential Palace. Security there is already tight. Other world leaders, including the Soviet Prime Minister Nikolai Tikhonov and the American Secretary of State George Shultz, will stay at their own embassies. Mrs. Thatcher and the British politicians will have their own armed special branch bodyguards travelling with them in the motorcade. A second security ring will be provided by members of India's Diplomatic Protection Unit. Not since the funeral of Pandit Nehru 20 years ago has India felt so much unrest and emotion surrounding a state occasion that is bringing to Delhi 50 of the world's leaders. And the Indian government has had very little time to ensure that its
funeral pyre is still burning tonight on the banks of the river Jamna in Delhi. Tomorrow her ashes will be scattered onto the holy waters of the Ganges in accordance with Hindu custom. Hundreds of thousands watched the 4-hour procession, and the leaders of 94 countries were there to pay their tributes despite continuing violence in the Indian capital. Tonight, the new Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi, made a visit to the worst affected areas and ordered stern action against rioters. Delhi has seen the worst of the communal fighting, with half the 1,000 dead in India resulting from incidents in the city. Today, the police opened fire in 10 places in Delhi, killing 7 people. The bodies of 70 Sikhs were found on trains arriving in the city, and all rail services in and out of Delhi have been cancelled. The funeral procession began at Mrs. Gandhi's childhood home, moved past the presidential residence and then along the ceremonial route to the India Gate War Memorial. There, security fears forced a change in the route to avoid the main shopping area, and the procession moved on to the open fields of Old Delhi to a place called Shantivana, the Forest of Peace. Our correspondent Brian Hanrahan was there and reports on an extraordinary day in the history of the world's biggest democracy.
India's poor have always been a major part of Mrs. Gandhi's constituency, but they failed her today. Discouraged by the violence and the strict security, they came in a trickle rather than a torrent to watch her last journey. The curfew was relaxed only a few hours before the funeral started, and transport both within and to Delhi remains restricted. Mrs. Thatcher, who'd arrived from London in the early hours of the morning, paid a courtesy call on the new Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi. It was brief. His is a busy schedule, with many visitors to meet, a nation in turmoil, and his mother's funeral to organize. military escort accompanied the gun carriage with Mrs. Gandhi's body from the house where it had lain in state, the house of her father, Mr. Nehru, where she'd lived for 16 years while he was Prime Minister. Now she followed the same route to a funeral pyre just a few hundred yards from his. 3 ropes led forward from the gun carriage, each drawn by a different service. Red for the Army, dark and light blues for the Navy and the Air Force. Ahead of them marched platoons of Jawans, ordinary soldiers, sailors and airmen. With rather less order, the family mourners followed in cars. Rajiv Gandhi's was closely guarded. Anyone who tried to approach was swiftly turned back. The route led down the Raj Path, scene of so much imperial splendor and national grief. The funerals of Mahatma Gandhi and her father, Mr. Nehru, had produced great throngs. Mrs. Gandhi's too produced great grief, but an altogether different scale. On either side of the processional route, there were empty spaces. Those who came to mourn her could manage only a thin line. Between them, for 7 miles through the city, came the cortege, Mrs. Gandhi's body covered by rose petals, but her face clearly visible. But even while the funeral was going on, black smoke signaled that the arson and looting were continuing. More vehicles had been set on fire, more Sikhs were surrounded in a temple fighting for their lives. The death toll since Mrs. Gandhi's assassination has been jumping by hundreds. It now stands at over 1,000, but there's no guaranteeing that's correct. The presence of the army, with orders to shoot on sight, appears to be having a restraining influence. But outbreaks are still occurring, and the Sikhs complain bitterly that not enough is being done to protect them. A column of tanks was stationed in part of the city centre where violence has broken out. Originally, the funeral procession had been passing through it. Today, the only army presence was not ceremonial. Protecting the 100 heads of state or their representatives has also been a major preoccupation of the police and army. Princess Anne represented the Queen at today's ceremony. She'd been in India as president of the Save the Children Fund, but will cut short her visit and return to London tonight. There wasn't even enough transport for everyone. Mrs. Thatcher at least had a car to herself, but the opposition leaders and Mr. Thatcher had to share a minibus to get to Shantivana, where the cremation was to take place. The foreign leaders did not join the funeral procession, but assembled to wait for it to arrive. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were represented, but Mrs. Gandhi's long tenure as India's Prime Minister and one of the leaders of the non-aligned movement attracted a galaxy of presidents and prime ministers. Samora Machel of Mozambique, President Nyerere of Tanzania, Mr. Mugabe of Zimbabwe. So many leaders jumbled together required a lot of guarding. The cremation site was on the banks of the sacred river Jumna. Close by were the sites where her father, Mr. Nehru, and her younger son, Sanjay Gandhi, were cremated. It was after Sanjay's unexpected death that her other son, Rajiv, was groomed to succeed her. Mrs. Gandhi was a Brahmin, and the rites of her cremation were carried out according to the Hindu scriptures. It was for her family to carry her onto the platform. Once there, the Indian flag was removed and the funeral pyre built round her. Tradition demands that sandalwood logs should be used because of the scent with which they burn. It's also the task of the sun to carry a flame round the pyre before lighting it. The burning itself is a long process, speeded by adding ghee, clarified butter, known to Hindus as one of the 5 nectars. Hindus see death as shedding an old body like a suit of old clothes, ready for the soul to take on a new one. When the fire has done its work, the ashes are taken and scattered, symbolically returning the body to the elements. For 18 years, Mrs. Gandhi had dominated India and its politics. She took it from a country in the grip of famine to one with nuclear weapons and rockets. She destroyed the old Congress party and built her own. She went to war with Pakistan and created Bangladesh. She was always controversial and was India's only truly national figure. The criticism that may be made of her is that she left a country ill-prepared to do without her. Now her son and the rest of India must learn to do so quickly.